Okay, now we are down to our second to the last approach in ELT, which is task-based learning or task-based approach. Now, the focus of task-based learning or TBL, as it is commonly known, lies on the process of communicating by assigning students tasks to complete using the target language. Well, that's it. That's basically it. That's the explanation of task-based learning, is that you, in order for you to teach the English language, you give them tasks or activities. And in these activities, they're going to complete it using the target language. Now, the assigned task has the following characteristics. First, it involves a primary focus on meaning because they have to interact with people in order to achieve the task or in order to uh, acquire or finish the goal. So there is really focus on meaning, okay, because they need to converse with or communicate with other people. Two, there is some there it has some kind of a gap on the task and the acquisition or learning of the language. Now, number three, participants can choose the language items needed to complete the task. I'll give you an example to explain this later. And of course, it has a clearly defined outcome. Okay, this is why it's also this, by the way, this one, task-based learning and CLT, they are considered the modern or contemporary approaches. The first three, grammatization, direct method, and audiolingualism are traditional approaches. So if you want a more effective and holistic lesson plan, there should be the involvement of or the anchoring of one traditional and then one contemporary. Just my opinion, just my suggestion. Okay. This has a clearly defined outcome because it's a task. There should be something that must be achieved or that must be finished. So there is a defined outcome. Now, the tasks can be in the form of information gap or even problem solving tasks. Now, of course, in task based learning, there is what we call task sequence. Now, the typical task sequence consists of three pre tasks, tasks, and post tasks. Now, what are the contents of each of these task sequence? First, you start with pre-tasks. Now, pre-tasks are activities that prepare students to complete a task. There can be more than one pre-tasks in a language lesson. Pre-tasks are similar to the main task. Now, the tasks are main tasks. This form the main part of the lesson. These tasks can involve a number of steps. Now, the activities are designed to promote fluency. And of course, we have post tasks. Now, as the name implies, these are the activities done after the completion of the main tasks. The aim of post task is to promote accuracy. Now, to give you to to better illustrate the meaning of these three task sequences, I'll have this example. So pre-tasks, this is usually the giving of instructions. Okay, so you will be introduced what main task or what kind of activity you are going to do, the instruction, mechanics, etc. So even at that stage, you are using the target language now when you communicate with your students. And then of course, the task itself, where they have to, follow the requirement or the order or errand given by the teacher in pre-tasks. And then sa post-task naman, after they have successfully done the main task, ang ibig sabihin ng post-task is yung giving of feedback. Okay? So halimbawa, role-playing. So role-playing, pre-task, you give the instruction, everything, how they will be graded, what they're going to do, on a topic, etc. That's pre-task. So the task there is, of course, when they already execute the role-playing. And then post-task is giving of feedback by the classmates or by the teacher. So this is an example on how to better illustrate these task sequences in task-based learning. So another good example here is planning a field trip. As teachers, we all know that a field trip can be an offshoot of a lesson. When you say offshoot of a lesson, this is more like a supplementary thing to do so that they will have further references aside from the information that they learned from the lesson. So if in your language lesson you talked about a museum, then the task that your students can complete is planning for a trip in the museum. So as a pre-task, you tell them, okay, so this is you're done with the lesson. Our task now is to plan a trip to a museum. Let's pretend that we are going to venture into a museum next month. Now, what I want you to do is to plan. what are the things that should be done, the processes or even the itinerary. Okay, so yun yung task na gagawin nila, itinerary. So you make an itinerary of what we are going to do each day when we go to a museum. So the making of the itinerary is the task or the main task. So how is English language teaching applied in there? Of course, because when they're making their itinerary, it should be written in the target language, or when they communicate with their classmates, target language. So along the making of the task, there is the application now of the English language. So that is task-based learning. We also have here ano ba, breaking down kung ano ba talaga ang gagawin. Pag ito ang example, like trip to a museum, if this is the example, ano ba yung typical procedures that we undergo for each task sequence, for example, in pre-task. So every students engage students rather into a discussion about museums. So you relate discussion with the previous language lesson. So the language lesson is about verbs or about nouns. Let's say, for example, then you incorporate the discussion about museums. Have you gone into a museum before? Do you know what it feels like, etc.? So you ask them to share about their knowledge or experiences of museums. So this happens, the pre-task, no, it happens right before the main task. So parang kumbaga parang warm up, before yung giving of instruction part din yan ng pre-task. So ito parang warm up. So you ask them to come up, ayan na, in the giving of instruction. You ask them to come up with a list of museums the class can probably visit. And then with the list, you ask students to choose at least 3 museums. Number of choices depends on the number of groups they like to visit. See, you're giving instruction, parang warm up. So that's the pre-task. The task now is that you divide the class into small groups. The number of groups and group size depend on the total number of students per class. So you make sure that each member per group has information needed by the group, like contact information, route and mode of transportation times, admission fee, displays, museum schedule, etc. Now, if you can have this done like in actual, that they can actually visit a museum, that's good. Pero when you can't, lahat naman siguro hindi naman tayo makaka-encounter talaga ng class na everyone is rich enough to go to a museum, no? So let's just have it as a make-believe session, okay? Next is that each member will share information he or she has with the other members of the team. So now they collaborate, they cooperate with each other. So that's where the task-based approach is being applied. Of course, post-task, each team will report based on the discussion, and then each team will present the report to the whole class. And of course, the teacher engages students to discussion of some communication problems students have encountered while performing the main task. So what are the problems that you've encountered when it comes to give feedback giving? So what are the problems that you've encountered while you're working with your team? Etc. etc. And then, of course, feedback. The teacher reviews learners' errors and, of course, make corrections. It's not enough, that you just give them the errors. You have to also make corrections or suggestions. So that is how task-based, when you hear the name itself, you will already know that it's giving of tasks that we learn our target language. Okay. What are the criticisms naman? What are the setbacks or the loopholes of this approach? Just like any other method, the task-based learning approach is not free from criticisms. First, the learning may not want to explore. The learners may not want to explore a new language and may just be content in using the language they already learned. This is the problem, especially if they are not monitored. So when they work in groups, instead of dedicating themselves to communicating with their group mates using the target language, di asa muwata na. Sige Sandri, diri ha pag magwatag mi siya. So there's no actual evidence of learning the language or learning the target language. So wala hindi siya fruitful kumbaga. Okay? Second, the learners may think that they're not learning or not being taught because there is no formal input. Ito pa yung isang problema ng task-based learning kasi there is no formal input, as you see in the instruction a while ago. It started with the discussion of the museums, etc. So they would think, how am I supposed to incorporate what I've learned about language in this aspect, and going to museums and making itineraries when we go to museums? So they might not understand the connection because there is no formal input. There's no formal connection between the activity and, of course, the language lessons. So it demotivates them in some ways. Third, the second language or the L2 speakers may consider communicating with their fellow L2s rather than with the teacher, rather than with the teacher, a waste of time. Okay, so teachers not listening, so might as well use my first language when I communicate with their classmates. So yun yung problema. If there is no thorough guidance, or facilitating with the students, hindi mo talaga sila na monitor group by group. So the successful implementation of task-based learning might not be high. Okay. Sometimes it would result to failure. Okay. So we have here other information about task-based approach. So you might as well, I will not be including this in the video discussion because I want you to have your other readings as well. So that ends our discussion for task-based learning. And on the next video, I'm going to discuss about my most favorite approach, communicative language teaching.